Hello, I'm Mimi. I'm a digital artist, and today I want to show you how you can really simply make your digital art feel a bit more natural. This video is sponsored by Playbook, but more on that later. I personally am not necessarily trying to make my digital illustrations look exactly like their traditional art. I kind of want them to fall somewhere in between. It's just useful to know how to make things feel more natural or more digital so that you can choose what you like best for your style. When we draw with traditional media like pencils or crayons on paper, there are lots of textures and irregularities that come through from the paper or from the pencils you're using. So we can recreate some of those effects in our digital art to make it feel a bit more natural. Because paper isn't usually completely smooth, when we draw on it we expose the texture of the paper because the pencil doesn't reach into all of the little holes and cracks. It only transfers onto the high points. When I make my brushes, I scan different types of paper so that I can integrate that texture into the digital brush to give it some natural texture. And it's something that I always look for in other brushes too. Another thing that can be helpful in choosing a brush that feels natural is choosing one that has a variable opacity and flow, so that when you use your pen lightly, the brush will be light, and when you use more pressure, it'll be stronger with more paint transfer, just like with natural pencils and paints. So if we want our digital art to feel more natural, we can choose brushes that replicate the texture of traditional media. So I usually like to go for brushes that have a bit of roughness to the edges and that have some texture come through when you make a stroke. You can get a feel for this at a glance right in the brushes panel, and these are just the default brushes that come with Procreate, but it's always good to try them out and see how they feel when you're using them. I made my own brush pack a few months ago inspired by crayons and sketching pencils, which I'll be using in this video, but there are lots of other pencil style brushes out there that you could use to get a similar effect. If you would like to use the exact brushes that I'm using, you can get them from my Etsy shop, and they've been optimized for both Photoshop and Procreate to maximize how many people can use them. I've made 3 pencil inspired brushes which are great for sketching and line work, and then 4 crayon inspired brushes which are nice for areas of soft texture and shading. So how can we use brushes to make our digital art feel more natural? There are a few things that I like to do, and I'll demonstrate first with a new sketch made from scratch, and then I'll finish some art that I've already started to make it feel less digital. So I'm starting in Procreate on a blank canvas with my simple sketching brush, and I'm going to start sketching out my idea using the pen in the same way that I would a regular pencil. By making my brush a similar size to what a pencil would be in real life and sketching just like I would with a real pencil helps my sketch feel natural because you get strokes that vary in how strong they are, where I use different amounts of pressure. I can use a chunkier pencil for a slightly different effect. This one is just a bit softer on the edges and has a bit more of the texture showing through. Everyone has their own preferences when it comes to brushes, so definitely try out a few different types and see what feels most natural for you to use. There are lots of great brush packs out there, but if you're not in the position to buy new brushes, there's also a really great selection that comes with Procreate that you can use, and most other drawing software also come with some default brushes to get you started. So I have a rough sketch drawn out of a character. I think I'll tidy up this sketch now by drawing it again on a new layer, but with more refined lines this time. And then I can use that as an outline for a colored illustration. This time I'm paying more attention to my lines and drawing them a little bit more neatly now that I know the rough shapes that I want to draw. I'm mostly using my simple sketching brush here because it's smoother than the chunky pencil brush but less digital than my smooth pencil brush. I don't really like having too many brushes to choose from, so my brush packs always just have a few that I actually use that cover me for a range of situations. When I have too many brushes to choose from, I get overwhelmed or I just forget that most of them are there. So if you're the same way, then curate your own little set of your favorites and put them somewhere easy to find to make your life easier. I'm pretty happy with my bunny outline, so I'm gonna color it in a similar way to how I would with regular pencils, except with the benefits of digital layers. I'll put all of my color layers underneath the sketch so that the outline always stays on top. And I think I'll use my chunky pencil to start colouring in with a nice wizardy purple. The key thing for me making this colouring feel more natural is keeping the brush size fairly small so that I have to sketch back and forth to fill the whole area in with colour. You can't increase the size of a real world pencil, so it forces you to colour in large areas just like you would with regular pencils. So if you can replicate that technique in your digital art, it'll give you a nice natural sketching texture. I don't often leave outlines on my finished artwork, but I do really like drawing this way because you don't have to worry about the edges as long as you stay pretty much within the lines, so it makes it feel a lot more like a colouring book. When I want a stronger brush, I'll use my smooth pencil, which has a lot less opacity and texture. It's the most digital feeling of the 3 pencil brushes that I made, but it's still quite useful. And again, if you keep the brush size quite small, similar to how a regular pencil would be, then you'll still get a natural effect from it when you use it to colour in. Now the crayon inspired brushes are a bit of a different feel and are quite nice for filling in larger areas of colour. And crayons in real life are often chunkier than pencils, so you can use a larger brush size with these in the same illustration and it'll still fit right in. I basically made these brushes so that I could feel like a kid again and have fun colouring things in. So I also like the crayons for adding really soft areas of colour with a lot of texture in them, like rosy cheeks. Generally, the more I can use textured brushes for everything, the happier I am with how my illustrations look. But also that's just my style preference. To me, introducing texture into your illustrations is a really simple way to move away from feeling digital toward feeling natural, because there aren't many things in the natural world that are perfectly smooth. When I'm adding in shading, I'll do it using a mix of colouring in with pencils, just like I did at the start, and then I'll also use some chunkier texture brushes. I do my shading on a new layer above the shape that I'm shading. Then I click on the little N, which stands for normal, and switch it to multiply blend mode. And then I click on the layer thumbnail and make that a clipping mask. The blend mode changes how the colors on this layer interact with the colors on the layers below it. So multiply means that it multiplies the purple that I'm drawing now with the purple and yellow below it, and that normally means that the color is more saturated and a bit darker. And the clipping mask makes sure that all of the shading that I draw on this layer gets clipped to the shape of the layer below it. So any lines that I draw outside of that get magically hidden away. I do these 2 things to pretty much all of my shading layers, so whenever you see me adding shading, you can safely assume that that's how I'm doing it. I made this chunky crayon brush so that I could quickly fill in large areas with texture, and so this one I always use quite big. It has quite a heavy paper texture to it and a scruffy edge that blends out so that you don't get any harsh lines. And if I really want the pencil effect to be obvious, then I'll make sure that some of my shading is done with pencil lines somewhere really visible, and that helps it stand out. Now if you want to go one step further, you can even add a paper texture to your whole illustration by importing a texture and then experimenting with different blend modes and opacity until it feels subtle enough. I often mix different paper textures that I have as well, so here I have 2 different textures to get the effect that I want. Now before I get started with the next style of drawing, I want to quickly tell you about an easy way to store and organize all of these lovely digital illustrations that you're making, which is today's sponsor, Playbook. Playbook is an online cloud storage for creatives that makes it easy to organize your work, and it's sort of a more visual version of Dropbox with options to tag what you've made so that you can find what you're looking for really quickly. I can use it to properly organize my illustrations to be easy to view at a glance, and I really like that I can add other media to my boards like color swatches so that I can build palettes for certain projects or just for future illustrations. It also has some built-in project management features for personal or professional projects, so I can keep track of how I'm progressing when I have lots to illustrate, and I can share my progress with clients directly from Playbook. If you're a creative looking for a cloud storage system that's visual and intuitive and easy to use, then sign up using the link in my description and you'll get 4 terabytes of storage and a new creative hub to store your lovely ideas. Thanks so much to Playbook for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the drawing. So I've just shown you one way that you can use pencil brushes in quite a natural way, but I often draw illustrations without outlines and that are a bit more in between digital and natural, so let me show you my process. I have this simple scene that I've already colored in, and at the moment it feels quite digital because it's very clean and smooth. But I'm going to make some simple adjustments and then add texture and shading to make it all feel more natural. The first thing I can do is redraw these clouds with a textured brush to make them feel more fluffy. So I'm going to retrace the shapes by reducing the opacity of the current clouds and making a new layer above them to draw my new, fluffier clouds with a crayon style brush. Clean, smooth lines are really quite hard to achieve with a lot of traditional media. So by just drawing the clouds again, but with a brush that has a lot of texture to it and softness to the edges, we get a result that already feels less digital. Plus, clouds are the perfect opportunity to add lots of texture, so why not? Now I want to add some texture to these big blocks of flat color. So one way I could do that is by adding a layer of coloring in as if with pencil, and that'll give my happy mountains a sketchy pattern across them. Personally, I think it makes things feel much more interesting when they have texture, so that's why all of my illustrations have a lot of texture in them and why both of my brush packs are focused on textures. I'm going to add some stylized highlights, and I'm using my charcoal brush to do that, which has some nice rough edges to it. Then to add little details like these flowers, I'm using my simple sketching pencil again because I really like the way that it feels and the variable flow of it when I use more pressure. For some of the large areas though, I like to use a broader texture brush like my chunky crayon, and that can go from quite soft and gentle to quite strong, so it has a nice range to it. If you can find, buy, or make yourself a nice set of brushes that have texture that you really like, and you can learn the techniques that give you a natural effect with them, your illustrations will feel lovely and natural and just be such a joy to make as well. It can take quite a bit of trial and error to find the brushes that work for you, but it's really worth the time invested because once you've found them, you can use them forever. I use both of my brush packs every time that I draw, which is most days, so it's been so worth the time that I invested in making them and getting them the way that I like them, even if it was really frustrating when I was in the middle of making them. I also really like using my chunky crayon brush to give a subtle texture to my backgrounds by introducing a bit of variety to the color. I've added some darker blue and some white just really lightly with the brush size set really quite big, and it's super subtle, but it just helps make the background feel less flat. And one more thing that I want to change is to make the edging of the mountains a little bit softer because I feel like they're a bit rigid at the moment, so I'm using my crayon brushes just to soften them. I'll finish this happy illustration with some sparkles in the sky using my charcoal brush because that's just something that I can't help myself from doing whenever I have a big blank space available like this. And now I've got something cute and joyful to post on Instagram that has lots of lovely texture and feels much more natural than what we started with. It still feels like a digital illustration, but it has some natural textures to it now, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. So that's how I use my pencil and crayon brushes to make my digital art feel more natural. If you'd like to get these exact brushes for yourself, you can find them on my Etsy store along with my original texture brush pack. And if you'd like to get them both, you can get them in a nice little bundle too. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already for more arty videos. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!